Hi everybody and welcome. I'm Carden Calder, Managing Director of BlueChip Communication. Thank you for joining us, and today we have Kevin Cain with us from OpenView Venture Partners. Hi Kevin.
Hi Carden. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. What we might do before we get started is I might just get people to let us know, confirm in fact that you can hear us. So if you can just type into the chat panel confirmation that you can hear us both okay, or any feedback on the sound quality, that would be very helpful before we get started. Okay, great. Thank you for letting us know that we're good to go. So Kevin has joined us today from OpenView Venture Partners, a Boston-based venture capital firm, and I'm delighted to have him here because I first saw Kevin speak at the Content Marketing World Conference in September in Cleveland, and what struck me about his presentation, and the reason I wanted him to share it with you and others in the BlueChip community, is that it was both very practical and it was entirely relevant to financial services, and most importantly it showed real results that he's been able to achieve while in that role, and we can see the commercial outcomes that have been delivered. This in my experience of seeing a lot of content marketing content is a pretty rare bird. So Kevin has expertise in both content marketing and corporate communications. He has got more than a decade in financial services and consulting, and in particular most recently helping expansion stage tech companies develop their content strategies as well as actually the overall firm content strategy. And one of the things about Kevin, which I think is something I would encourage you to sort of follow up on, is that he is moving to Australia in February. So we expect him to be here late February, early March, Kevin?
Correct, yes.
So he's now the third person who has been working in content marketing globally who's hitting our shores either already or early next year. We've got a great opportunity here to learn from folk who've been doing this offshore in different and sometimes deeper markets. So before I hand over to Kevin, I'll just tell you a little bit about you, our audience today. We have a really good representative sample of people joining us. We've got people from superannuation, from funds management, banking and private wealth, industry associations, and also insurance. So you are in a cohort that sort of represents the entire breadth of the wealth industry. So a little housekeeping. The webinar is going to be recorded. It's available on demand after this session, and we will email you the link. You can ask questions by typing in the chat panel, and we will answer those questions at the end, or if you send them while we're going through, Kevin might want to take some of them on the fly as well. Kevin, it's really great to have you here. Over to you.
Great, Carden. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that introduction. So as Carden said, everyone, I hope you can hear me. And if you can't, please just type into that chat panel and let us know. But as Carden mentioned, my name is Kevin Cain, and I'm the Director of Content Strategy here at OpenView Venture Partners. And what I wanted to do is spend the next 20 minutes or so telling you guys a little bit about how to create a financial content strategy that works. And what that really means is how are you going to build a content marketing program from the ground up. But before I do that, I just wanted to take a little bit of time to tell you a little bit more about myself. So, I started my career, as Carden was saying, in financial services. I've been there my entire time. I began at KPMG, an accounting firm, went on to become a writer and an editor, spent about 6 years at State Street, where I was a managing editor overseeing their thought leadership. And then about 2 years ago, I came to OpenView, which is a venture capital firm here in Boston. Now, for those of you who don't know OpenView, we're the leading venture capital firm that invests in B2B software companies at the expansion stage. Now, one of the greatest challenges venture capital firms like ours face is getting the best companies to choose us as an investor over all the other VC firms that are out there. Now, to overcome that challenge, what we try to do is be different and valuable to our buyers that we target. So in our case, our biggest differentiator is that we have a great staff of consultants that helps the companies we invest in get bigger faster. No other VC firm does this like we do, and within our niche, we've done a great job of building our brand as a value-add VC. So we built a substantial content marketing program to communicate and reinforce this positioning. And what I wanted to do was just give you a couple of examples of what that program looks like. So over the last couple of years, we've created more than 3,000 blog posts and articles on our site. We've published over 50 ebooks, reports, and case studies. We have a weekly newsletter that goes out to more than 28,000 entrepreneurs around the world. We have over 20,000 fans and followers across our social networks. We get about an average of 140,000 page views every month on our websites. And on our YouTube channel, we've had 135,000 views to date. But really the best measure of the success of our content marketing, in my opinion, is that when we identify a great investment target, more and more they already know who OpenView is and why we're different. And that's important because it speeds up our sales cycle and increases our conversion rates. Now, in case you're wondering, we didn't get these results overnight. Content marketing is definitely a marathon and not a sprint. It can typically take 6 months or more to start getting results with a content marketing program that are meaningful. And it really takes patience and perseverance to succeed. But as you do, you'll see yourself getting more traffic to your site. You'll see brand awareness increasing. And ultimately, you'll get more sales. So, the structure of my team here at OpenView is actually relatively small. We're just 3 full-time people. Myself, there's a managing editor, and then there's a content marketing specialist who handles all of our content delivery. Now, we're also lucky to have involvement from OpenView's staff. We've got the support of some great freelancers, and we leverage industry influencers. But my point in telling you this is really that you don't necessarily need a very big team to be successful at content marketing. Really, all you need to be is smart, focused, and resourceful. So another thing to tell you before we kind of kick off here is, as Carden mentioned, I spent a lot of my time working with OpenView's portfolio companies, and so what that means is I help them with their content marketing program. So over the last couple of years, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what the best practices in content marketing so that I can transfer those learnings onto our portfolio companies, and that's some of what I want to share with you all today. So with all of that said, I'd like to spend the next 15 to 20 minutes giving you guys an overview of what I think are some of the most important learnings to being successful at content marketing, whether it's in financial services or really in the industry. So I've boiled everything that I've learned really down to about 11 key learnings, and as I go through each point over the next few minutes, I'll try to give you some examples from my experience here at OpenView to try to illustrate where we've seen success, the things that we've struggled with, and all that type of stuff. So with that, I'll kind of go right into it. So the first thing I think is really important is that you need to get sharply focused. And this probably seems like an obvious learning, but it's also not always quite so obvious. Everyone talks about getting sharply focused, but most companies have trouble doing it. And my view is that the reason for this is that people tend to fail at content marketing in particular because they try to do everything at once and as a result aren't really able to do anything very well. So rather than try to boil the ocean and be all things to all people, what I'm suggesting here is that you need to get really sharply focused and zero in on just one customer segment at a time, which is what you see here. So if you're a pension fund, maybe you zero in on baby boomers who are just entering retirement, or on 20-somethings who are just beginning to save. Ideally, you're going to pick whatever segments represent the greatest opportunity for your business. Then, once you've identified that segment, look at all the customers within it and zero in on the best ones. Then use those best customers as a model for your target buyer. So when I got to OpenView, I was pretty lucky because the firm was already sharply focused on a customer segment, B2B software companies at the expansion stage that are selling to North American customers. As a result, my team's job has been to get a better understanding of our target buyer, the founders and CEOs of those companies, as well as some of the key players within them. I've also found that it's really important to have a good understanding, I think it's really important to consider the buyer personas and specific leverage points in the buyer journey. Lots of people talk about this too, but they use it as an end product rather than to gain insights to help them design their content marketing program. Understanding your buyers takes a lot of work. You really need to get to know your buyers, what their pain points are, what their concerns are, what they need, and what's going to motivate them to make a purchase. Now, there are lots of different ways to get this information, but the best one's pretty simple. Just talk to your buyers. Understanding the buyer journey is also really crucial because you need to know where your buyers are getting stuck, and so you need to provide them so that you can provide them with the right content to turn those sticking points into leverage points. And that brings me to my second lesson, which is that you need to hire a managing editor, which is really a key learning. Every content marketing program needs to have its own CEO, which is typically going to be a managing editor. That person's job is to make everything work, so that's really an important and challenging role. So having worked with a bunch of companies, I see a lot of them make the mistake of trying to make content marketing an add-on responsibility to someone on the marketing team's existing responsibilities, and that typically doesn't work. You really need someone whose sole focus is building and managing your content program. Now, what's interesting about the role of the managing editor is that it's evolved quite a bit over the last few years. It used to be that you just needed someone who was an excellent writer and a good project manager. And while it's still all of those things, today it's also important that that person really know SEO, that they be savvy with online marketing, that they really know social media, and that they've got experience with analytics so they can determine the ROI in a program. More than anything, though, they have to be a strategist who can figure out not only how to create really compelling content, but also how to market that content and deliver it to people at the right times. So at OpenView, I'm the CEO of our content marketing, but I've also got a managing editor. Whereas I'm focused on creating the biggest pieces of content, my managing editor owns all the daily content that we produce. That brings me to my third lesson, which is the importance of building a content creation community. So as important as it is to have a managing editor, that's not going to be enough. What you really need to do is build a content creation community that extends well beyond the marketing team to include freelancers, influencers, and coworkers. And so let me speak to each of those a little bit. So freelancers are essential because they give you additional manpower and flexibility, not to mention a broader range of skill sets than you have in-house. So here at OpenView, I've got a very small team, as you've seen, but we have about 6 freelancers who we work with on a regular basis. That helps us increase our output, but it also allows us to manage costs. Next, we've got a network of industry influencers. Now, influencers are basically just the journalists, the bloggers, the consultants, and industry analysts who influence your buyers' decisions. You want to befriend these people and get them to help you as you try to create and distribute your content. What that does is make the whole process easier for you, as well as add some credibility and clout to everything that you do. So here at OpenView, we've got about 100 industry influencers that we work with to create articles, to record podcasts and videos, and just to push our content out into the world, and that's been really important. The next thing is to leverage your coworkers and then to tap into their ideas and expertise. You invariably have thought leaders all around you, and you want to leverage those people's ideas. Not only that, you want to work with the people who are maybe social media enthusiasts and get them to share your content, or you want to work with the people who have an affinity for writing and maybe get them to do a guest blog post for you. The real challenge here, is getting your coworkers to be enthusiastic about content marketing when it's not part of their job. And I think there are a couple of different things you can do to try to make that happen. And I'll give you an example of what we do here. So what you see on the screen here is the blog hog, which is basically a pig on a pedestal, and it's a small statue that we give out every week here at OpenView. It's basically just a small prize that we distribute to the person who has written the best, most successful blog post that week. Now, it's kind of a silly thing, but it's surprisingly effective because what it does is it appeals to people's sense of competition. And so for absolutely no cost, every week, we've got people competing to write the best blog so that they can have bragging rights. Again, it's kind of a silly thing, but it is incredibly effective, and it has been a way for us to get greater engagement around blogging here at OpenView. Now, the last piece of building your content creation community is that you need a community of fans, followers, and subscribers who are going to engage with your content and share it with others. So we spent a lot of time here getting to that 28,000 newsletter subscribers and those 20,000 social media followers, and I'll tell you, if we didn't have that audience, we wouldn't be able to do half that we do. So I think it's really an important piece. After that, it's important to create really high-impact content, and I would say there are 6 characteristics of any piece of high-impact content. The first is that it needs to be optimized for search so that people can find it online, which they're going to be looking for information. If they can't find it, there's really not a lot of point of creating the content in the first place. After that, you want to make sure that every piece of content you create reflects your deep understanding of your buyers so that when they do find that content, it's actually going to resonate with them. Beyond that, the content needs to provide value so it's actually useful and helpful for people so that they're going to need it and actually want it as opposed to you just wanting them to read it. Your content also needs to demonstrate your brand aspirations, and what that means simply is that your content is a very public reflection of your company and who it is, and so you want to make sure that it's properly putting your brand out into the marketplace and representing what you want that brand to be. Your content also needs to drive conversions. Every piece of content needs to get your audience to take some sort of action. That might be as simple as visiting your website. It could be bookmarking a page on your site. Whatever it is, you want every piece of content to drive some sort of action or behavior. And lastly, you want to make sure that your content promotes engagement and virality so that people interact with it and are willing to share it with others. That's the only way you're going to get that content to really go out to people who you don't already have in your network. Now, I can tell you it's really hard to do this with every piece of content you create. It takes focus and discipline, and I'd like to say that we do that all the time, but it's really, really hard. Sometimes we create a piece of content that's successful. Sometimes we create pieces of content that flops. And that kind of brings me to another key lesson, which is that what I think is great often fails, and what I think is just okay sometimes turns out to be great. The important thing is that you've got to get your content out there and then keep your eyes and ears open to see how the market responds. Certainly in financial services, we have to be very attentive to what we're putting out there, but I think there's a tendency to kind of sit on top of content for a long time and try to really overthink it, and that comes at the expense of not being able to get some real-time feedback from your audience of whether or not the content is good or not, which I think is desperately needed in many cases. So what you see here is an example of a piece of high-impact content that we created here at OpenView earlier this year. We put this piece out in March at the height of March Madness, which is basically a basketball tournament here in the United States. And rather than have basketball teams competing against each other, we created our own brackets where companies were competing against each other in terms of having the best company culture. Now, this was a relatively simple piece of content for us, but it had a big impact, at least by our standards. It went viral. What it did was get over 2,200 votes, 263 tweets, 240 likes, and 18 comments, which for us is pretty huge, considering it only took 2 days to put the piece of content together. Now, sometimes we also spend many months putting together ebooks and don't get nearly as great of a result. So I will say that content marketing isn't always a perfect science. That said, what I do know is that to be effective at content marketing, you really need to be focused on what you're doing. And so what we do to that effect is to have a 15-minute meeting every day to talk about our content. We look at how our content from the previous day performed, and then we look at what we're going to be publishing that day. And the whole idea is that we're simultaneously getting feedback on the previous day's content and then trying to implement what we've learned from that into the piece of content that we're going to be publishing that day. So we basically have a real-time feedback loop that's allowing us to continuously improve. And I can tell you having that kind of focus has really allowed us to make some big improvements. That brings me to step 5, which is to repurpose, repackage, and recycle your content. And I think this is really a critical piece for scaling any content marketing program. Basically, the idea is that every piece of content you create needs to be able to do double or even triple duty. So in other words, you want to make sure that blog posts are getting repurposed into ebooks, that ebooks are getting repackaged into webinars, webinars are getting recycled into articles, etc. You get the idea, which is simply that small pieces of content need to get recycled into bigger pieces, and those big pieces of content should get broken down into smaller ones. So this sounds really easy, but I'll be honest, it's actually not. We've been talking about it for months here at OpenView, and we're still not doing it as well as we should be. That's because it takes a huge amount of forethought, organization, and alignment, and it's hard to make that happen. But we are making some progress, so let me take a minute to kind of show you what we actually do. So here at OpenView, our big pieces of content are our ebooks, and what we try to do is plan out ahead, maybe 6 months to a year ahead, what ebooks we're going to be publishing. Now that's the easy part. The hard part is then figuring out 12 months in advance what those actual ebooks are going to look like. So we spend the time many months in advance figuring out an outline for every piece of big content, a very detailed outline. I'm not talking about a few bullets. I'm talking about 5 or 6 pages. And from that detailed outline, I have a bunch of questions and variables that I need to get answered. So from there, I take those questions to my managing editor, and I say, I'd like you to create small pieces of content over the next few months that address each of these questions. So my managing editor then goes and he'll talk to in-house subject matter experts and try to create some articles from them to answer some of the questions. He might reach out to influencers to do a podcast or a video to get other questions answered. Over time, he's creating a bunch of content that I'm going to ultimately repackage into an ebook when all is said and done. Now, this whole thing works really well in theory, but in practice, it's hard to make everything run smoothly with that kind of alignment all the time. We want to reach the point where virtually every piece of content we create is organized that way, but right now, to be honest, we're only doing that about 60% of the time. So from there, I think it's important to focus on conversions. Conversions are ultimately the ultimate objective of every piece of content you create, and it's important to make sure that every piece of content has a conversion goal associated with it, because you want people to take an action as a result of consuming your content. Now, those conversions could be any number of things. It could be signing up for a free trial. It could be liking something on Facebook. It could be tweeting something, sharing something, downloading, you name it. The whole thing about conversions is that you need to keep in mind that it's going to be a series of conversions that ultimately lead up to a sale or to some sort of big action. You need to think about conversion paths and all the different steps that are going to happen along the way to make a big conversion happen. Think of each conversion as a touch point with your audience where you're getting them to do something that will ultimately lead to something bigger. If you go for a big conversion from day one, you're not going to be very successful, but if you get people to do small things over time, eventually you're going to get them to make that sale or to make that purchase or whatever it may be. So being a content marketer, I of course have a conversion goal associated with this presentation, and that's simply for you to connect with me on LinkedIn. So I would encourage you to do so using the link that you see here. From there, we go to step 7, which is that you need to amplify your content through multiple points of contact. Content delivery is just as important as content creation. I think that's something that's often overlooked. It's all about making contact with your buyer, and you need to have a plan for delivering every piece of content to your buyers through the best distribution channels available for reaching them, some of which you see here. Now at OpenView, we focus on a bunch of different channels, as you see here, and we try to focus on the ones that are going to have the most impact for us. Now, depending on your business, it could be any number of different channels, but I think there are a couple of golden rules that you want to follow with content delivery that are kind of universal. So the first of those rules are that you always need to consider who your audience is and what their context is when selecting your method of contact, because you want to make sure that it's relevant. Next, you want to make sure that your method of contact is effective enough to drive whatever conversion you're after. Then you want to always opt for less expensive forms of contact over more expensive ones. After that, you want to make sure that you want to keep in mind that you're going to need multiple points of contact with your buyers, and you're going to have to use multiple contact vehicles and programs. So it's not a one-and-done type of a solution. And lastly, keep in mind that the less work it takes to make contact, the better. People try to do a whole bunch of stuff to make delivery of their content, and sometimes the simpler options are the best, and putting a lot of extra time and money into it isn't always the best solution. So that brings me to step 8, which is to establish a content rhythm. It's really important that you're able to publish content on a regular and consistent basis. It's the only way that you can build momentum and create a real community around your content. If your content comes out in drips and drabs, it's really tough to do that. So my belief is that if you can publish one piece of really good content every day, your content marketing efforts are going to really pay off. So that's exactly what we've done at OpenView. In fact, here's what our content marketing program looks like. So on a daily basis, we're doing 2 to 3 blog posts as well as 1 article. Then every week we're putting out 3 videos and an original podcast. And then on a quarterly basis, we're doing ebooks, webinars, infographics, case studies, reports, and actually a couple other things that aren't listed here. It's only when you get into a real rhythm like this that you can create the kind of content marketing machine that really adds value. Now, we didn't start with that rhythm. We built up to it over time. And I'd say the trick here is really to start small and grow slowly. Master one thing before taking on another, and of course, get really organized, which brings me to my next point, which is that you need to institutionalize your content marketing. Content marketing is all about experimenting to find the very best processes for creating and delivering your content, and then refining those processes over time and documenting them. And it's the documenting piece that I think is really important when it comes to institutionalizing your content marketing. Processes are our friends, and when they're in place, people know what they need to do and when, and so it's really important that you institutionalize and document your content marketing practices, whether it's how to create something or how to deliver it. What it does is ensure consistency so things get done consistently every time. It also makes it really easy to transfer knowledge so that when new people come onto your team or whatever it may be, people are switching around on your team, you're able to make that transition pretty seamless. It's all about knowledge transfer and being able to create a consistent, repeatable process. Step 10 is that you need to measure everything that you do. It's really important. I think a lot of content marketers spend a lot of time doing activities, and a lot of people fail to then actually measure the return on their investment. Metrics are really essential for content marketing, and if you don't have a content program that's underpinned by really robust metrics and analytics, I think it's hard to gain any sort of credibility for your program or to demonstrate why it's important. It's ironic because in financial services we work in numbers all day long, but a lot of us in marketing seem to be afraid of numbers, or at least steer clear of them. And I think it's important to have a lot of rigor around content marketing and to build a robust marketing dashboard that captures all of your metrics and makes them available to people who need access to them. So in my view, you really need to look at metrics in terms of 5 basic dimensions. The first is content creation. So are you actually creating all the content that you've committed to as part of your rhythm? If you said you're going to do a blog post every day, have you actually done that? I think it's important because you need to hold yourself accountable. We often create goals for ourselves but fail to meet them, and if we don't hold ourselves accountable to what we say we're going to do, it's really hard to move forward and to be successful. Likewise, you need to have goals around content delivery and keep track of whether or not you're meeting them. So if you've got that blog post every day and you committed to sharing it on Twitter and posting it to your website and I don't know, maybe putting it in a newsletter or something like that, have you done that for every piece of content that you're supposed to? Are you checking all the boxes? Until you get to a point where all that is becoming absolutely part of your routine, I think it's important to track it and make sure that you're holding yourself accountable. After that, I think impressions are really important. Excuse me. You want to know how many people are being exposed to your content, how many people are getting, even if they're not consuming your content, how many people are registering the fact that they're seeing your brand somewhere. And that can be incredibly impactful. Obviously, you'd prefer people to read your content or watch your content, but even just seeing a tweet from your company come through the Twitter stream or see a video from you on YouTube that they don't click on still gets your brand in their head, which I think is a big part of the battle. Beyond that, it's important to look at your conversions. So how many people are taking an action that you desired? If you've got a new ebook that you want people to download, how many people have done so? What's your conversion rate? I think that's incredibly important because that's ultimately what you're trying to drive with your content marketing. And lastly, I think it's important to look at things like web performance. So how many people are coming to your site? How long are they staying when they get there? What do they do when they get there? Those types of metrics I think are really important. Now, I mentioned this briefly earlier, but I think it's really important to have a discipline of putting together a metrics dashboard and reviewing it with your team. So here at OpenView, we do that on a weekly basis. We have an 11-tab Excel spreadsheet, which we put together every week. It takes a couple hours to do so, and it's a very manual process. But we then spend an hour as a team reviewing the document and dissecting it line by line. Now, it's a painful process, I'll admit, but what it does is force us to be very disciplined and to look at how our content is performing, and allows us to make real-time decisions to how we want to adjust our content strategy going forward. So it's a great way to get real-time feedback and to make adjustments rather than wait till the end of the quarter or the end of the year when it's already too late. We like to be very nimble with our content strategy and to adjust based on what we're learning week to week. And that brings me to my last lesson, which is just the importance of holding frequent retrospectives. Now, I think as marketers, most of us meet on an annual basis to set goals and probably on a quarterly basis to review those goals and how we're progressing against them. But kind of to recap what I said previously, you also need to meet on that weekly basis to talk about your metrics, and you need to meet on a daily basis to talk about individual pieces of content. It's an awful lot of meetings, I'll freely admit that, but I can tell you when you have that kind of discipline, it allows you to make much more impact with your content and to really be nimble and to be much more impactful and effective with what you do. It's certainly something that we've adopted here at OpenView, and it's made a huge impact in terms of how effective our content is, and it's what allowed us to get the considerable metrics that we've got to date. So those are the 11 lessons that I have to share with you guys today, but just to recap, they are to get sharply focused, they're to hire a managing editor, you need to build a content creation community, you need to create high-impact content, you always want to repurpose, repackage, and recycle all of your content, you've got to focus on conversions, you want to amplify your content through multiple points of contact. You want to develop a content rhythm. You need to institutionalize your content marketing. You have to measure what you do. And then lastly, you want to hold frequent retrospectives. Now, that was an incredibly quick overview of this presentation, and I went through it quickly to leave plenty of time for questions, and so as not to rush you guys. I know you've got other things you need to do today. But I would encourage you, if you're interested in learning more, we've put all this information into an ebook that's free for you to download anytime. You can get it at contentfactoryebook.com. The ebook is called It Takes a Content Factory. It's 100 pages and it outlines how to, what we call, build a content factory, which is just a content marketing program from the ground up, and it goes into all these points but in a lot more detail. So that's my presentation at a really high level. I'd love to stop and take any questions that you guys may have at this point.
Kevin, thank you so much. That was great. I realised how much I didn't absorb the first time I saw it. I feel like I need to watch it another 3 or 4 times to really get everything I can out of it, and I'm going to make it compulsory viewing for my whole team.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that was. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask you, you've got such a great program running, and you've got such a high volume of content, and you have metrics that are really impressive. Can you take us back a little bit to the beginning when you didn't have all that? What was it like when you joined, and what were the first challenges you faced then?
Sure. So when I joined 2 years ago, the content marketing program was substantially different insofar as, we were already doing a lot of activities. We were producing a ton of content, but the mindset here was all about let's create a ton of content and not worry about the quality. It was all quantity, quantity, quantity. And so the biggest challenge that I already had a firm that believed that content marketing was important, which is a hurdle in and of itself for many people that I fortunately didn't face here, but we can talk about that in a minute. But the big thing that I faced was getting people to understand that it's not just about volume with content marketing. Sure, that's important. I think you need to get content out on a regular basis, but what you really need to do is focus on making that high-impact content that's really high quality. It's going to provide value. It's well-crafted. It's SEO optimized and all those types of things. You can spend all the time and money in the world you want creating a bunch of content, but if it's not really impactful, you're wasting your time. So I think that was the biggest struggle, kind of shifting the mindset from let's just do volume, volume, volume to let's focus on some really quality pieces that are going to move the needle much more.
And did you have those staff when you first started, or are they resources you've gained over time?
Well, so we've started from scratch in 2009 with content marketing, and so the stats kind of came over time. We started from scratch, from ground zero then, and so in the last 2 years, I'd say we've doubled or tripled our performance in a variety of areas. So, for example, we went from having 10,000 newsletter subscribers in January 2012 to 28,000 today, so 180% gain. We've doubled our website traffic or more. So it's been pretty impressive, and I think what it has showed to the team and to our executives here is that the approach of quantity over quality isn't the right one. It's really the other way around. And in fact, what we're going to be doing in 2014, hopefully, is scaling back the amount of content that we create a little bit further still so that we're really focused even on higher quality content. I'm pretty convinced that doing less but really doing it quite well will give us even better results and allow us to be a little bit more thoughtful than we're able to be right now.
Yeah. And we've got a question here, which is how have you overcome challenges with distribution of content?
Well, I think there are a number of challenges to overcome, but I think the first one is really understanding your audience. I talked about that as step one, the need to get highly focused, and I think that applies to content delivery as much as anything. You need to understand how your customers like to receive their content. Now, some people, are traditional. They want, a hard copy sent to them to their desk. Some people go via email. Some people have very short attention span. They're looking for infographics or videos or something that's going to kind of entertain them and be easily consumed. So I think the first step is understanding how do people like to consume their content, and then remembering that your audience isn't going to be universal, and so that you probably want to recycle a piece of content so that some of it's going out in that print form and another piece might be a video, and then maybe it gets recycled another way into an infographic or something like that, so that you're reusing the same ideas but putting them out through different channels, trying to appeal to a broad audience. The reality is that it may feel like this whole idea of content recycling may feel like you're just putting the same thing out over and over again, but your audience is never going to notice. Unless they're a super user, which chances are they aren't. They'll never know that today's blog post actually appeared somewhere else as an infographic, 2 days ago. So I think that's the first thing to think about with content delivery. The next is sort of just to be really persistent in experimentation. I think it's easy for organizations to kind of come up with their routine. All right, well, we always send out an email, and we share it on Twitter twice, and then we call it a day. And I think it's important to constantly kind of push yourself to try different venues and see what works. You may think, oh, my audience isn't on Twitter, or Facebook isn't relevant to me, but our audiences are shifting over time. Generations are changing, and I think we need to be experimenting with different things and seeing what works. And you may find that 5 out of 10 of the new ideas aren't good, but at least you've tried them, and you can say, all right, those aren't the right ones, but these other 5 perhaps are some things that we should be considering going forward. So I think it's important to always innovate.
Great, thank you. I had a question as well, which sounds to me, you referenced this in the presentation, sounds to me like it might be an issue for some of the people joining us today, which is how do you actually get people on board inside your organisation? Have you had to do that, or did you walk into a role where they were already well and truly warmed up and they were sold on it?
Well, at OpenView, I was lucky. I did walk into a situation where people were already on board with content marketing. I didn't have that challenge to face. What I would say is that the portfolio companies that I consult to don't all live in a similar world. And so I think the way that you get that kind of buy-in from the leadership team or the executive team is to just make a really rational case to them. I mean, first of all, it's explaining to them how the way people consume information and look for information is changing. We obviously live in an online world. People don't talk to, they don't go to the phone book anymore to find information. They go online to Google first thing. What that means is that you want to be coming up in the search results when people Google for the answer to whatever question it may be. So that's the first thing. You need to be online, and if you're not, you're missing a huge opportunity. Not only that, it used to be that you could talk about yourselves and your marketing collateral and talk about how great your products and services are. That's not what people are interested in anymore. They want useful information that's going to be really relevant to their lives and the challenges that they're facing right now. So explaining that there's this kind of shift in how people access information and what people are looking for is the first step. Next, I think it's just kind of demonstrating what the opportunity of content marketing is. It's a way of engaging and attracting customers in a way that we haven't previously, where you're becoming sort of a trusted advisor and a subject matter expert or a thought leader. What you're basically doing is showing your audience, you're not trying to sell them, you're trying to communicate to them that you've got expertise in a particular area. Over time, what's going to innately happen is that they're going to realize that you've got this expertise, and they're going to think of you when it comes time to make a purchase decision. So I think it's thinking about that and this mind shift. And then lastly, it's just looking at or demonstrating to them the impact that it can have. It's a very cost-effective way of driving people to your website. It's a very cost-effective way of generating leads. So if you think about the hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars that you may have spent in the years past, doing sponsored editorials or doing events and things like that, content marketing is a relatively inexpensive way of generating the same type of leads to your site and of really raising brand awareness about your organization. So I think when you kind of couple those arguments together, it's pretty sound logic as to why content marketing is something that's worth pursuing. The important thing to keep in mind, though, is that, as I said before, it's a marathon and not a sprint. So if you go into content marketing thinking, all right, we're going to do this for 3 weeks and we're going to get immediate results, then it's really a fool's errand. You need to have a long-term view in mind. Content marketing doesn't happen overnight. It's going to take several months, if not, the better part of a year to really get the results. Now, you don't need to necessarily, well, it's not to say that you're not going to get any results, but the meaningful results are going to take time to build up. So you need to have kind of set that expectation with management that it's going to take some time to build, but when you've done it well, the impacts will certainly be very terrific.
I hear you. I understand this whole point about planning better than I ever did, because I think we certainly jumped in and found that we needed to then really slow down, and I think the experience has been very much the same for our clients. Look, I think that brings us to the end, Kevin. Thank you very, very much for today. Incredibly valuable. I would say to everybody, when you get the webinar link, by all means review it, but you're also very welcome to share this with colleagues. We're quite passionate about helping people in Australia understand this depth of knowledge that there is in some other markets around content marketing. So we're really keen to share these sorts of resources. Also, we've aimed to keep it pretty short and snappy, because we know that 40 minutes staring at a screen is quite a bit, but we do have other resources on this topic. One of the things that BlueChip is doing is we're doing an ebook around how to make the content marketing transition, and we're also doing a checklist for people. So those things will be freely available. And Kevin, I think you're pretty open to catching up with people when you get here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I would certainly love to meet any of you in person after March 1st when I arrive in Sydney, and certainly would look forward to connecting with you on LinkedIn, or you can find me on Twitter or online. Just Google my name, you should find me. So I would love to connect.
Great. Well, that's it then. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. And Kevin, thank you so much.
Thank you, Carden, and thanks, everyone. I really appreciate your time today.